Get on the ground. A man in a knockoff security vest screams, pointing a pistol at my 65-year-old grandfather who's holding nothing but a watering hose. The world seemed to slow as chaos erupted right on our front lawn. In that heart-stopping moment, I could hardly believe my eyes. A fake cop, dressed in a uniform that looked more like a costume than an official outfit, was brandishing a weapon at my gentle, retired veteran, whose only crime was tending to his beloved garden. The air was thick with tension and disbelief as neighbors gaped, frozen in shock. My grandpa, who had spent decades serving our country with honor, now found himself at the mercy of an imposter, one who claimed to enforce community rules with an iron fist. I didn't know whether to scream or run, but deep inside, I knew this wasn't just another petty HOA spat. It was a clear, dangerous abuse of power. The scene was surreal. The fake cop's eyes wild and unhinged, his hands trembling as he barked orders into a handheld radio, while my grandfather, his face lined with years of wisdom and kindness, clutched that watering hose like a lifeline. In that moment, everything changed. I realized that if no one intervened, our quiet neighborhood would be forever stained by the reckless actions of those who masquerade as protectors. This incident was about to ignite a firestorm of consequences, a moment that would force the truth into the light and turn the tables in the most unexpected way. What the fake cop didn't know was that behind our humble home, my grandfather was not alone. His long-forgotten past held secrets and alliances that would soon come roaring back, alliances that spanned decades and reached deep into the halls of justice. As the echo of that frantic command reverberated across our lawn, I braced myself for a confrontation that would change everything, knowing that sometimes the quiet heroes of our lives have a way of reclaiming dignity even in the face of blatant injustice. In the peaceful cul-de-sac of Mapleview Estates, a neighborhood famed for its lush lawns, carefully pruned hedges, and a reputation for quiet, unassuming living, residents prided themselves on maintaining order. Every house was a reflection of the community's strict guidelines, and every infraction, no matter how trivial, was reported to the local homeowners association HOA. Mapleview was a place where uniformity reigned, and deviation was met with swift, sometimes draconian, measures. At the center of this microcosm of control was Karen Simmons, a self-appointed enforcer known around town as HOA Karen. In her late 40s and always impeccably dressed in conservative attire, Karen roamed the streets with a clipboard in hand and an unwavering determination to maintain what she believed was the neighborhood's pristine image. Over the years, her relentless reports, fines for an unapproved mailbox design, warnings for a slightly overgrown hedge, had earned her both admiration and scorn. To some, she was a guardian of community values. To others, a tyrant overstepping her bounds. But the events of that fateful morning shattered everything we thought we knew about authority in Mapleview. On the other side of this well-ordered world stood my grandfather, Harold Hal Jefferson, a 65-year-old veteran whose life had been a tapestry of service, sacrifice, and quiet dignity. Hal had spent decades protecting our country and had always remained a pillar of wisdom and kindness in our family. Since retiring, he had found solace in tending to his small garden and spending long, reflective hours by the old oak tree in our front yard. His watering hose, a simple tool in his gentle hands, symbolized his enduring commitment to nurturing life even in his later years. Our home, modest yet filled with memories of better times and lessons of honor, stood at the edge of Mapleview. It was a place where laughter echoed from warm family gatherings and where the scars of past battles were worn with quiet pride. But even here, the shadow of the HOA's overbearing influence loomed large. I had grown up hearing stories of how Karen Simmons had imposed fines on those who dared express themselves too boldly, a reminder that even in a close-knit community, conformity was the ultimate law. When a fake cop appeared that morning, his uniform shoddy and his demeanor aggressive, it wasn't just an isolated act of misconduct. It was a symptom of a deeper malaise, a community where power was abused, where those in charge twisted rules for personal gain, and where the vulnerable were left defenseless. Hal, with his weathered face and gentle eyes, had always believed in the rule of law and the power of decency. He never imagined that he would become a target of such lawlessness, especially not by someone who claimed to be protecting the community. In this setting, the stage was set for a showdown that went far beyond petty fines. It was a battle for the soul of Mapleview Estates, a clash between the rigid, oppressive hand of unauthorized enforcers and the enduring spirit of those who live by honor, decency, and a deep respect for one another's rights. My family and I had always believed that justice would prevail, and now, as the drama unfolded right in front of us, we were determined to stand up and reclaim our dignity. The chaos that began with that fateful 911 call rapidly evolved into something much larger than a mere act of misbehavior. Once the fake cop pulled his gun on Hal, the neighborhood was thrown into turmoil. I was immediately on the phone, contacting anyone who might help: neighbors, local authorities, and even an old friend from the FBI whose connection to Hal's storied past in law enforcement was well known in certain circles. Security footage from our home captured every chilling detail: the imposter in his mismatched security vest, the wild look in his eyes, and Hal's calm, almost resigned expression as he clutched his watering hose for dear life. I replayed the footage over and over, each frame a stark reminder of the reckless abuse of power that had taken place on our front lawn. With trembling hands, I began to compile all the evidence: video clips, audio recordings of the fake cop's frantic orders, and even text messages from frightened neighbors who had witnessed the scene. By midday, word had spread like wildfire throughout Mapleview Estates. Neighbors, long accustomed to the strict oversight of the HOA, were shocked to learn that one of their own, a trusted, gentle veteran, had been threatened with a firearm by an individual impersonating law enforcement. Social media exploded with shared footage and heated comments. Hashtags such as hashtag Justice for Hal and hashtag No Fake Cops began trending locally. The collective outrage was palpable, and it wasn't long before local news outlets arrived on the scene to capture the unfolding drama. Karen Simmons, ever vigilant and quick to act, scrambled to distance herself from the debacle. In a flurry of panicked phone calls and hastily composed emails to the HOA board, she tried to spin the narrative, claiming that her intentions had been misunderstood and that the situation had been handled in the interest of community safety. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the community's outrage only grew. My friend at the FBI confirmed that the fake cop was indeed an imposter, a low-level criminal exploiting the trust placed in law enforcement uniforms for personal gain. Emboldened by the support of the community and the backing of the FBI unit, I realized that Hal's ordeal was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a deeper crisis in Mapleview Estates. The HOA's unchecked power had created an environment where individuals like the fake cop could operate with impunity. If nothing was done, the vulnerable would continue to suffer, and arbitrary rule enforcement would become the norm rather than the exception. I reached out to local advocacy groups and legal experts, gathering statements and organizing meetings with other residents who had faced similar injustices. The digital dossier I compiled grew thicker with every new piece of evidence, each file a testament to the need for accountability and reform. I documented interviews with neighbors who recounted past encounters with HOA overreach, and I posted every detail on community forums and local news websites. The public outcry was swift and decisive, with many demanding that the HOA board take immediate action to root out abuse of power. As the tension escalated, the HOA board announced that a special emergency meeting would be held to address the incident and to review their enforcement practices. The announcement came as a surprise to many, as the board had long been resistant to criticism. But now, faced with undeniable evidence and an outraged community, they had little choice. I prepared for the meeting with a mix of apprehension and determination, knowing that this confrontation would be a turning point not only for my family, but for the entire community. During the days leading up to the meeting, digital petitions calling for the resignation of corrupt enforcers and the implementation of transparent, fair policies began to circulate, amassing thousands of signatures. I posted regular updates on my blog and community forum, urging residents to attend the meeting and to speak up for their rights. The collective voice of Mapleview Estates was becoming louder with every passing hour, and I could sense that a watershed moment was on the horizon, a moment when the abuse of power would finally be confronted head-on. As the emergency meeting approached, the atmosphere in Mapleview Estates became increasingly charged. Social media platforms buzzed with heated debates over the fake cop incident and the broader implications for community governance. Hashtags like #JusticeForHal, #InFakeCops, and #MapleviewMatters were plastered across every post, and the digital evidence of that fateful morning was shared widely. Each clip and screenshot fueling the fire of public indignation. Local news channels began covering the story in earnest. Reporters camped outside neighborhood homes, interviewing residents who expressed both shock and anger at the incident. It's unbelievable that someone could use a fake badge and gun to threaten a 65-year-old veteran, one reporter noted, her voice shaking with emotion. This is about more than just one man's safety. It's about ensuring that no one in our community is ever subjected to such blatant abuse of power again. The narrative quickly evolved from a singular act of violence into a symbol of the broader systemic issues plaguing the neighborhood. Unchecked authority, arbitrary rule enforcement, and the erosion of trust in those meant to protect us. Inside the HOA board, the tension was palpable. Emergency meetings were held in secretive, dimly lit conference rooms, and leaked minutes revealed a rift among board members. Some, who had long defended strict enforcement policies, now hesitated as digital evidence and public opinion turned against them. Others argued passionately for reform, insisting that the board had a duty to protect the rights and safety of all residents, not to serve the whims of overzealous enforcers. If we allow this kind of abuse to continue, what kind of community are we? One board member was quoted as saying. The internal discord was making headlines and intensifying the pressure on the board to act. I continued to build my digital dossier, posting updates and live streams of community reactions. My online posts detailed every nuance of the incident, from the moment the fake cop pulled his weapon to the supportive messages from neighbors and local law enforcement. Digital petitions calling for accountability swelled in numbers, and influential local bloggers joined the conversation, championing the need for a fair, transparent system that protected the vulnerable. Karen Simmons, the face of HOA overreach, found herself increasingly isolated. Her attempts to justify her actions, claiming that she was merely protecting community standards, were met with ridicule and disbelief. In one hastily recorded video, she tried to explain away her behavior, but the raw footage of that terrifying moment, with her aggressor's voice echoing and my grandfather's trembling figure, rendered her explanations hollow. The community's outrage was swift and unforgiving. As the final public hearing loomed, neighbors organized peaceful rallies outside the HOA office. Banners reading, "Our rights, our voice," and "No more fake cops" fluttered in the wind as dozens of residents marched, demanding accountability and reform. The movement had become a unifying force, bridging the gap between longtime residents and those newly awakened to the dangers of unchecked power. Every shared hashtag and every viral video reinforced a single message. Our community would no longer stand for intimidation and arbitrary enforcement. On the eve of the public hearing, I held a small gathering at our home. Friends, family, and supportive neighbors came together to share their experiences and to prepare for the showdown with the HOA board. The room buzzed with anticipation and a shared sense of purpose. It was clear that this wasn't just about my grandfather or even the fake cop incident. It was about reclaiming the very essence of justice in Mapleview Estates. I spent the night reviewing my evidence, rehearsing my testimony, and solidifying my resolve. By morning, the digital dossier was more complete than ever, and the community's support was undeniable. The stage was set for the final confrontation, a moment when every resident's voice would join in a chorus demanding change, and when the balance of power would finally tip in favor of truth and justice. The decisive moment arrived on a cool, brisk morning at the Mapleview Estates Community Center. The boardroom was packed with a diverse array of HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and hundreds of impassioned residents, all gathered for the final public hearing that would determine the future of our neighborhood's enforcement policies. With a calm yet unwavering presence, Councilwoman Denise Collins stepped up to the podium, her eyes shining with the hope and resolve of a community that had had enough. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed logs, and the heartfelt testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Collins began, her voice steady and authoritative. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Simmons, specifically her reckless 911 call on a fake cop that resulted in a gun being pointed at our 65-year-old grandfather, were driven not by a genuine concern for community safety, but by personal bias and an abuse of power. Our community's rights and the dignity of our residents must be upheld at all costs. A heavy silence fell over the room as Collins continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all sanctions related to this incident and will launch a full disciplinary review of the practices that allowed such an egregious abuse of power. We will also implement new guidelines that protect the rights and safety of every resident, ensuring that public safety measures are respected and that no one can take the law into their own hands. Today's decision is not merely about reversing an arbitrary fine. It is a resounding declaration that Mapleview Estates will stand for justice, accountability, and the inalienable right to live without fear of personal vendettas. Her words resonated deeply, and murmurs of agreement rippled throughout the assembly. At that moment, a longtime community advocate, a stalwart defender of individual rights, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united as one," he declared, his voice ringing with passion. "No resident should ever have to endure the terror of a fake cop wielding a gun, no matter how absurd the pretext. Let this vote mark the turning point, a clear signal that our community values truth, dignity, and the sanctity of our rights above all else. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our freedoms is met with swift, decisive action." His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting everyone in a collective call for change. Following his address, a senior official from the local law enforcement oversight committee presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert testimonies, and official reports confirming that the fake cop incident was a flagrant abuse of power. The evidence was irrefutable. My grandfather's peaceful act of tending to his garden had been violently interrupted, and every attempt by Karen Simmons to justify her actions was exposed as a sham. The Internal Affairs panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Collins concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Mapleview Estates, a community where every resident's rights are upheld, and where public authority is exercised with fairness and integrity. Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that no one, regardless of their position, may impose personal vendettas on our community. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the inalienable right to live safely and freely." Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for property rights and dignity. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Mapleview Estates. The days of arbitrary fines and abusive behavior were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks following the historic vote, Mapleview Estates underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded sanctions and sweeping reforms enacted by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, igniting passionate debates about property rights, community governance, and the right to live without fear of arbitrary enforcement. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Maple View Estates" and "Community United for Justice," celebrated the decisive action taken to safeguard every resident's dignity and freedom. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Grandpa, hashtag No More Fake Cops, and hashtag Community Rights trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand against abuse of power. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their own experiences and to envision a future free from arbitrary interference. Neighbors, who had long felt intimidated by the heavy-handed tactics of overzealous enforcers, now spoke openly about their right to live, work, and enjoy their property on their own terms. Our community must be a place where every voice is heard and every resident's rights are respected, one impassioned speaker declared, his voice echoing throughout a packed auditorium. The atmosphere was one of hope and renewal, a promise that Maple View Estates would always champion individual dignity. Within the reformed HOA board and local law enforcement oversight, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and a responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that every complaint was scrutinized with fairness and that no resident would ever again suffer from arbitrary enforcement. Our duty is to protect the rights and dignity of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed in a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to justice and accountability. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations also mobilized to further empower residents. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about individual rights and the importance of holding power accountable. When we stand together, our voices have the power to create lasting change, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite in the fight for a more inclusive and fair governance model. For me, the journey from that terrifying morning to the final, triumphant resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to stand up against the fake cop and the abusive overreach of HOA Karen Simmons, defending my grandfather's honor and reclaiming our right to safety and dignity, had not only restored our faith in justice, but had ignited a movement that resonated throughout Maple View Estates. Neighbors, once silenced by fear, now found their voices and shared their own stories of resistance, united by the common belief that no one should be subject to arbitrary intimidation. Karen Simmons, once the self-appointed enforcer of the HOA's draconian rules, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands united. Her past transgressions, meticulously documented and widely circulated online, underscored the necessity for reform and the perils of unchecked power. Her influence faded as residents embraced a future where creativity, freedom, and individual dignity were paramount. At a final celebratory gathering in the Central Park of Maple View Estates, residents, local officials, and community advocates came together under the golden glow of the setting sun. A massive banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Justice for All" was unfurled between towering oak trees, and heartfelt speeches filled the air with promises of a brighter, more equitable future. Today, we celebrate not only the victory of our rights, but also the resilience of our community, Councilwoman Collins proclaimed, her voice ringing with unwavering conviction. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful testament to our collective determination to protect our freedoms and ensure that no one, fake cop or overzealous enforcer, could ever threaten our safety again. As each new day dawned over Maple View Estates, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how a fake HOA cop pulled a gun on my beloved grandfather, and how his FBI unit turned the tables, exposing the abuse of power, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of individual rights and the importance of community justice. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Mapleview Estates, truth, dignity, and freedom would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a terrifying encounter evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Mapleview Estates would forever be a place where justice, integrity, and respect for human dignity shone as brightly as the morning light.